I suppose it was inevitable after all. Have you ever faced a problem so far above your skill level that you didn't even know where to start? That's exactly how I felt staring at the crumbling retaining wall under our deck. This was supposed to hold up a concrete slab and a ton of soil, but half of it looked like a Jenga tower after a toddler's turn. It was flirting with collapsing, and I was the new lucky homeowner who got to deal with it. We bought this house a few months ago. This is how it looked then, and we were dreaming of peaceful mornings on the deck, romantic evenings with barbecues, not frantic afternoons preventing that deck from falling off a cliff. Okay, a small drop, but still. To make matters worse, or funnier depending on your perspective, I'm not a structural engineer or a professional builder. I'm just a guy with a stubborn DIY streak and a partner, Kat, who's enthusiastically doing her parts in our home renovation adventures. Little did we know, this retaining wall project would turn into a roller coaster of defeats and victories. Before diving in, let me set the scene. The wall in question is in our back garden, holding back a chunk of soil, which in turn holds a concrete slab right below our deck. Half of the wall is surprisingly fine, sturdy, straight, and built like it actually wanted to be a wall. The other half, it looked like it had seen things, wars, earthquakes. Blocks were cracked and leaning, while the ones that were still standing anyway, the soil below the concrete had said goodbyes, and the concrete slab had taken a deep dive long time ago. Proof of this is that the deck is straight and was apparently built after the dive. I was pretty sure a stiff breeze could have knocked the rest of it, so I thought. This contrast was baffling. How could half the wall be totally fine and the other half be on life support? I decided the first step was to investigate. You know, like those home renovation shows on Channel 4, where the host says, "Let's see what we're really dealing with here." And that's me grabbing all sorts of tools, starting to dig the ground in front of the wall, trying to find clues. At this point, I was looking what had made the middle part look like a missing tooth from a funny smile, and here searching for the foundations, if it ever had one. It turns out our wall has a split personality. The good half, the one that you see on the left, was original construction, meaning that it was built at the same time as the house decades ago. It sat on proper concrete footing and had 3 solid rows of concrete blocks above it. The bad half, however, looked like a rushed afterthought. There was barely any concrete footing beneath it. I mean, I've seen pancakes thicker than that foundation. And on top of the thin footing were only 2 rows of blocks. Originally. By the time we moved in, most of those blocks had already gone on holidays. My digging confirmed that the footing under this half was cracked, uneven and shallow. My amateur forensic skills pointed to water damage. The area behind the wall likely collected water. When winter hit, that water turned to ice, and if you've ever left a full can of pop in the freezer, you know how the story ends. So there I was, sitting in a muddy hole facing the reality. Half of my retaining wall was made, air quotes here, by someone who apparently didn't know you're supposed to, make it sturdy. I approached the wall with the determination of a knight facing a dragon. My weapons of choice? A tiny SDS drill, a somewhat laughable small hammer, a trusty pickaxe, and a cold chisel. If you're picturing a guy trying to slay a dragon with a toothpick, that's about right. In my defense, I genuinely thought these tools would suffice. The damaged blocks looked like they were only one harsh look away from collapsing. I thought I would poke the wall a bit with the SDS drill, maybe loosen the mortar a bit, then give it a few convincing whacks with a hammer, And voila! Rubble city. Reality check? Concrete doesn't yield to wishful thinking. What you see here is me going at it, looking unreasonably confident. I am trying some chiseling along the joints, trying to weaken the structure. Dust was flying, my arms were getting a workout, and after a good hour or two, I had a few chips and 3 dislodged blocks to show for it. That's right, half a day of effort and I managed to remove 3 sad blocks. Victory? Not exactly. I swear, the wall was mocking me. After several hours of this one-sided boxing match, I had to admit defeat. I retreated, and Kat tried to cheer me up.
Tomorrow's another day. Maybe we just need a bigger hammer?
Maybe we need explosives. One thing was clear. I needed to bring in some bigger guns. Day 2 of demolition arrived and I was back on my bull-headed mission. After the humbling experience with the mini tools, I decided to level up my arsenal. Nope, I didn't buy a concrete breaker. That would be too easy. And remember, we're on a budget. Instead, after a weekend at Kat's parents, I borrowed, air quotes again, a couple more concrete chisels and a bigger sledgehammer from her dad that I need to return at some point. This long-handled beast was basically Thor's hammer awkward cousin, heavy and unforgiving, and I was hopeful it would make me look like a mighty warrior instead of the wall's punching bag. The satisfying sound of concrete actually cracking finally filled the air. But then it didn't take long until I got defeated. Again. However, after some attempts, I managed to break off a good chunk of the wall. This time about 5 blocks worth, including the foundation in one piece. I got really scared that I would break the concrete slab below. But eventually, all good. Apparently, the previous builder had poured a 40 centimeters blob of concrete behind those blocks, probably trying to reinforce that sorry half of the wall. Not being able to do anything about it, I moved on to removing some of the remaining blocks. And with the help of my multiple, this time, chisels, I managed one by one to remove some of them, not all of them. This was defeat number 2. Sure, I made more progress than day 1, about half the bad wall was now gone, but I still couldn't finish the demolition. I had reached the limits of what my non-existent brute force could do. Enter day 3, the day I swallowed my pride and decided to rent a proper concrete breaker. Yep, I did it. Sometimes the difference between a DIY zero and hero is just one power tool rental away. Yorgos. That's me, by the way. Gloriously intimidating, blue, hefty, and with a promise to make Swiss cheese out of concrete. I announced to the wall, it's you or me. I fired up the concrete breaker and the first contact with the wall's footing was like magic compared to my previous attempts. Chunks of concrete started cracking and breaking off as if the wall suddenly remembered it wasn't supposed to be there. You can clearly notice the difference. What took me hours of futile hammering now happened in mere minutes. This thing was an absolute beast. I couldn't help but laugh. Within a couple of hours, the job that I have been struggling with for days was finished. The bad half of the wall was now a pile of rubble and dust. Demolition complete, victory at last. I felt like doing a touchdown dance. Now remember earlier when I stubbornly avoided renting a breaker to save money? Yeah, let's just say I had a little chat with myself about that. I went something like, hey Siri, was saving a few quid worth 2 days of torture? No, it wasn't. Lesson learned, work smarter, not harder, or maybe spend a little to save a lot. I made the mental note to remind future me of this wisdom next time I consider using a spoon when I really need a shovel, metaphorically speaking. With the wall finally down, I was feeling my moment of accomplishment, covered in sweat and concrete dust, yes, but gloriously happy. However, any seasoned DIYer knows, after any win, there's always a mountain of work still ahead. In my case, that mountain was, well, a pile of rubble. My original plan included the reuse of some blocks. That's why I was trying to not break them. And of course reuse the old foundation to save on time and effort. Yeah, scrap that. I realized my initial idea of saving the existing concrete footing and just beefing it up with extra concrete was not going to fly. Why? Because the old footing, the part that hadn't been completely pulverized, was too narrow and not level. It wouldn't provide enough width to properly support new blocks and any reinforcement behind them. In simple terms, it was a skinny little strip and I needed a big, beefy base if I wanted it to last. Most importantly, the old foundation was not aligned with a good half of the wall. It was off by a lot. So I decided to break out the rest of the foundation as well. But instead of renting the breaker again, I know what you're thinking, here he goes, being cheap again. I thought I could manage this with my hand tools now that the air was open and I could get good angles on the footing. Also, the foundation was relatively shallow. Remember, that was the problem to begin with. So maybe it wouldn't be too bad to pickaxe it out. You probably wonder, why is he torturing himself again? Fair question. The answer is a mix of stubbornness and the genuine belief that I could do it with just manual labor. After several hours, and yes, a few more breaks to watch the clouds and question my life choices, the old foundation was finally history. However, I still needed to clear out the big chunks of concrete slabs that came out because they were very difficult to maneuver. About an hour later, I had managed to break it all up and clear it out using just hand tools, sweat, and perhaps a bit of my soul. Was it worth doing by hand? Debatable. Kat came out midway to find me sitting on the ground staring at the sky.
Oh my gosh, are you okay?
Yep, I'm just bonding with the concrete or something. With the old foundation gone, I now had a nice deep trench ready for a fresh concrete footing. The plan here was to create a footing that spans the entire length of the wall's bad half, with enough width and depth to support the new blocks and prevent future evil water frost attacks. In practical terms, I aimed for a footing about 35 centimeters wide and a good 30 to 35 centimeters deep, which is actually chunkier than the good parts foundation. Basically a mini fortress under the ground. My mum, who is an actual structural engineer in Greece, that's where I'm from originally, in case you didn't know, hence my terrible accent. So anyway, my mum told me to use rebars. However, it is difficult to find them in the UK, and they build houses here without rebars at all. So, no rebars. Mixing and pouring concrete is straightforward if you have a concrete mixer. I did not, and I had reasons for that. Let me defend my honor here. Renting a mixer for days would cost quite a bit, and I had already spent some money on that breaker rental. Worth it, but still. Buying a mixer was an option, but then I would own a big, heavy mixer with no place to store it after. Our garage is already full of tools, boxes and one very disappointing cat who hates clutter. Using my hands and a shovel, on the other hand, like a caveman, is free and gives a great workout. Who needs a gym membership when you can mix concrete on the ground, right? Right? So I went old school, mixing by hand on a large 1 meter by 1 meter plastic mixing board. If you've never mixed concrete by hand, it's kind of like making a giant batch of cookie dough. If cookie dough were heavy, grainy, and it could crush your toes if you dropped it. The first few batches went okay. I had to mix many batches to fill the whole footing length. After about the third batch though, the novelty of hand mixing wore off. My back started reminding me I'm not 18 anymore. And my shoulder was like, "Aww, you thought swinging a sledge was hard?" How cute. Still, I persevered. I had a little motivation mantra. One more batch, then you can have a snack. Well, I didn't have any snack, but whatever keeps you going. Finally, the trench was full and level with fresh, wet concrete. I smoothed it out with a trowel, making sure it was level and nicely shaped. Looking at that freshly poured footing was incredibly satisfying. It's a simple grey slab in the ground, but to me it was like a work of art, the foundation of all my upcoming glory. More importantly, I knew this was solid work. That footing isn't going anywhere. During this downtime, I took the opportunity to, move my arms again without groaning. And Kat finally got me to sit down and help plan out the garden that will go in front of this wall. That's right, the whole idea for this project is her dream garden. We spent an evening with her excitedly showing me a list of plants she has been compiling. Yes, a list. Actually, multiple lists. Flowering plants, evergreens, shrubs, there's a list for each. Did I mention she loves lists?
Oh my god, the Pyrrhus is red and it's evergreen. It can go next to the Acer because then the Acer in autumn is red, but then the Lunar Magic is red throughout the summer. And then we've got underneath, we've got the yellow, we've got the climber, we've got the sea buckthorn that's orange. What about the purple? We've got the hydrangea, we got campanula can be coming over the walls. Oh my goodness, eucalyptus, gold ellen, hebe, pale mix. I've got it all.
With a solid foundation in place and cured, it was finally time to build the wall. At this point, I almost couldn't believe we were switching from destruction to construction. I was about to lay my first concrete block ever. No pressure, it's just the thing that will hold back tons of soil and prevent our deck from collapsing. I gathered my materials, fresh concrete blocks, sand and cement, a trowel, level, and a builder's line. And of course my secret ingredient, blind optimism. Starting at the end, where old meets new, I laid down a generous bed of mortar on the new footing. If you've ever played with mortar, it's like peanut butter that eventually turns to stone, so you have to work somewhat quickly and get things right. I battered the end of the first block, mortar on the sides, and placed it carefully on the footing. Moment of truth, it was not level. Just a quick adjustment here, squish it down a bit on one side, scrape off excess mortar here, add a smidge there, level? Yes! Block number 1 set. Only a dozen more to go. The first row of blocks was critical because it sets the stage for everything above. I even improvised a couple drain pipe outlets using a bit of PVC. Can you tell I was not about to let water get the best of this wall again? Not on my watch. 2 days later, with the first row cured, I shoveled some rubble and gravel behind the blocks, filling the gaps between the back of the wall and the soil I had dug out. This backfill, with coarse material, helps drainage so water won't accumulate behind the wall again. I made sure not to fill it all the way up though, just enough to support the wall by leaving room to add more backfill later as the wall grew taller. One thing I learned from researching retaining walls, YouTube deep dive at 2 AM. Anyone? Anyone? is that filling the hollow cores of concrete blocks with concrete can significantly strengthen the wall. It basically turns the hollow blocks into a solid piece of concrete, much sturdier, especially for a retaining wall that will hold back soil pressure. So I decided to do just that. I mixed up a batch of pourable concrete, a wetter mix so it would flow into the block cavities easily. Then, one by one, I put concrete into the hollow centers of the blocks in the first row. As I did this, I could almost hear the wall going, "Oh, that's the stuff." It felt good knowing I was making this wall solid from the inside out. With those preparations done, it was time for the second row of blocks. Of course, the second row was just rinse and repeat. With 2 rows down, I moved on to the third and final row of blocks. These would bring the rebuilt section up to the same height as the intact original section. I occupied myself by pouring concrete into the second row and backfilling more rubble behind the wall for support and drainage. Do you notice how I take my time putting each piece of the puzzle in place? The rubble had to be solid in order to support the concrete slab that holds the deck. I even reinforced it with some blobs of concrete just to make it even more sturdy. After that, I laid down mortar on the second row, lifted the first block on the third row into place, and so on. By now, I was feeling like a semi-pro bricklayer. Okay, maybe more like a confident amateur, but still, you know what I mean. Dare I say I was having fun with it now? Na, 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 na. Did I mention how heavy these blocks are? They're heavy. They're dense concrete blocks and each one weighs 17 kilos. After the third row of blocks was set in mortar, I stepped back and looked at the wall. It was all there, full height, complete from bottom to top, seamlessly tied into the original half. Of course, I wasn't completely finished. I still needed to do the final touches to turn these stacked blocks into a fortress, filling the hollows of the third row with concrete, adding more rubble backfill behind the wall, adding more concrete backfill behind the wall, smoothing out the top of the wall with a bit of mortar to even it out. Aesthetics count too, you know? And of course, I repointed the other half of the wall. If this thing is going to star in our garden, it should better look good. And then it was done. Like, done. I honestly almost didn't believe it. This project was a strange journey, from confusion and near defeat to newfound DIY heroics. Heroics might be a strong word, but let me have my moments. There were definitely times I wanted to quit, like after those first 2 demolition attempts, but sticking with it and seeing it through makes the victory so much sweeter. It's amazing what you can do when you're determined and just stubborn enough. Kat, of course, immediately started talking about planting her beloved garden in front of the wall now. I swear her eyes sparkled more at the thought of rose bushes and lavender than my actual wall. But that's okay. In her world, the wall is just the canvas. The garden will be the real art. And you know what? I'm excited about that too. We plan to have a little planting party, just us two, to celebrate. Finally, I want to thank you, the viewers, for coming along on these wild rides. If you have watched this far, congratulations. Your attention span is stronger than that old wall was. Until next time, take care, tackle your new projects with humor and determination. When a wall stands in your way, you can always break it down and build a better one. Just maybe rent a breaker first. And remember, if we can do it, you can do it.